So for you guys, everyone who is joining us today for the first time, we have these learning collaboratives, and they're really opportunities for members to really share with each other and learn about the successes, the challenges, the things that have gone well, things that haven't gone well, about really trying to integrate climate and health into professional education and curricula. And so we're joined here by three amazing panelists. And so they are health professionals and leaders from the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action and Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so I'm just going to give a quick introduction for them. And the way we're going to format today is that we'll have two presentations. Both of them are about 20 minutes long. And then after that, we'll have about a 20-minute discussion. And so you guys are welcome to put questions in the chat as people are presenting. And then also at the end to feel free to unmute yourself, put the questions in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with. If you do feel comfortable taking yourself off of your, turning your cameras on, that'd be really beneficial just for our presenters to have some people that they're chatting with as well. But if you don't want to, that's totally fine as well. And so today we're joined by Dr. Homan Wai. So he's an internal medicine physician, an inaugural member of the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, and a member of the steering committee and vice chair of education. We have Dr. Lisa Doggett. She's a family physician and senior medical director for Access Point Health, American Academy of Family Physicians Vaccine Science Fellow, and the co-founder and current president of Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility. And we have lawyer Becky Bernhardt. So she's the executive director of Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility and was previously involved in criminal justice reform at the Alliance for Safety and Justice, the Texas Fair Defense Project, and the Innocence Project, and other various organizations. So again, we're so happy to have you guys here. Thank you so much. And we're going to start with Dr. Homan Wai. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see the screen okay? All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about our efforts in Virginia to integrate climate and health into medical education. So my name is Homan Wai. As Christy mentioned, I'm the co-chair of education for Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. I'm an adult internist practicing at the suburbs of Virginia near Washington, D.C. Today's talk, I'm going to introduce some of my fellow co-conspirators, if you will. So at the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, we're an organization of 450 plus clinicians across the state of Virginia, founded in 2017 under the direction and guidance of Dr. Samantha Dude. She's a pediatrician and chair of our steering committee. If you can see off of the audience, I'm also Dr. Nick Snow, is a gastroenterologist and co-chair of education along with myself at GCCHE. So I want to start with this, the fact that I think the medical community has been embracing the fact that climate change has very deep connections to health, and it is important to address this in medical education. Back in 2019, the AMA, the American Medical Association, came out with adopted a resolution stating that it supports teaching on climate change in undergraduate, graduate, and continuing medical education, such that trainees and practicing physicians acquire basic knowledge of the science of climate change and can describe the risks that climate change poses to human health and can counsel patients on how to protect themselves on the health risks posed by climate change. I think there's a wide agreement with that. The question is, how do we get there? And as a follow-up, as I was putting my slides together, I also found that back in this year, June 2013, the AMA again adopts, stresses the importance by adopting a new policy declaring the climate change as a public health crisis. So we all get that it's important. The question is, what do we do from there? Now, I would start by showing you a curriculum. So this is a sample of a medical curriculum. This is actually taken from the UT Southwestern School of Medicine. And as you can see, there's a lot of things in there. And I think even even from year 1 to year 4, from the pre-clerkship to the clerkship to the post-clerkship phase for medical students, you can see that there's a lot of different components to train a physician from day 1 to day several thousands, as you and I think there's a lot of competing demands. And I think the trend these days is that the year 1 and year 2, which is traditionally the pre-clerkship phase, has been increasingly shortened to try to cram more material in to allow for more career development and other types of hands-on experience in the clerkship and the post-clerkship phase. Now, as we do that, I think we can all appreciate that curriculum is often jam-packed to begin with, and to think about adding an additional element into it is much like trying to fit one extra person into the Mini Cooper, like you see on the right side. We also know that different schools have made different progresses. Now, independent of how hard it is, we see that different schools around the country, when it comes to having leaderships from either faculties or students, ranges from either having a school with no organized presence at all to a full integration of curriculum and even a content thread and climate and health track. So what are the stages in between, and how do we get everybody there in an organized manner? Well, as you look at School B, that is where some of the most interesting developments are happening. So traditionally, when we talk about curriculum integration, it's been a very top-down approach, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. But there are student interest groups that are springing up all over the countries, and many of them affiliated with MS4SF, Medical Students for a Sustainable Future. And many of these students are filling out what's called a planetary health report card. So a report card for the schools and the programs of education, if you will, to really look at how sustainable their healthcare system and the curriculum is, and try to assign, actually not try to, but literally assign the schools a grade, and see where the opportunities are. And that's been sending a very powerful message to different medical schools around the country to really try to look at the subject and see what they can do for curriculum integration. I also put this other icon here, the sustainable pharmacy projects, to highlight that it's not just the medical students, but all the allied health professional students, including our pharmacy students, nursing students. There's more and more interest in the younger generations, and a genuine movement toward the work that we have ahead of us. So how do we go from A to B to C to D to E? Well, I think the idea of a collaborative is that everybody has been working in silos and not really able to help each other out. And it always seems like we're reinventing the wheel when it comes to how to get an elective approved, how to look at goals and objective, how to look at curriculum integration in a holistic sense, or even just in the basics, how to get a student organization or interest group started. And that's where the Virginia Climate and Health Education Collaborative, it's quite a mouthful, but we lovingly call it VCHEC, was born. So under the vision and guidance of Dr. Dude, the chair of our organization, we got folks together and really reach out to different healthcare professional schools to see if we can get together and share some wisdoms and get everybody to the next phase. So, this is a description that's on our website. And we state that the climate change is here and impacting our health today. So why aren't future health professionals learning about it? So as we established the VCHEC, the collaborative in 2021, we started by having a summit where we invited all the different schools. And it was quite a challenge during one of the years of the pandemics, but we're able to get everybody together and share some wisdoms. And I'll be showing you a little bit more about that. So after the inaugural summit in Winchester, Virginia, We did a follow-up summit in 2022 in Richmond to try to include more schools and move the process forward. And this past year during the 2022 summit, we have participation from many regional health professional schools, including UVA, VCU, School of Medicine, Nursing, Pharmacy, Virginia Tech, and also Shenandoah School of Health Professions, especially the PA program, Johns Hopkins University, Georgetown, and GW School of Medicine, as these are all regional schools that were that are around us. And here's some pictures of the summit. On the left side is the 2021 summit, where everybody is definitely more socially distant and with the pandemic. And to the right is a screenshot of our 2022 summit, made possible for a conference tool. And in both of these, we did offer a hybrid participation model, so folks can be in person and online and try to participate equally. So we talked a little bit about top-down versus bottom-up approach. And the traditional top-down approach of curriculum reform has to do with looking at national curriculums, looking to the deans and the curriculum committees and the course directors, and looking at organizations like the AMA or the clerkship directors of internal medicine or other organizations in different specialties to really try to guide the schools to decide what is important in the curriculum. But we also see that a bottoms-up approach has been really helpful. So really, growing from the students' grassroots level to student leaders, to faculty that really want to carry the torch in different institutions. And again, put up the logo for the Medical Students for a Sustainable Future, as that has been a really powerful organization to work toward that goal. And also, just in another example, in Shenandoah University, they started an organization called the Student Clinicians for Climate Action. And this is akin to what GCCHE is trying to do. Obviously, this is done in a bigger global sense. So I'm here also to plug the Climate Resources for Health Education by GCCHE that has been in progress and launched pretty recently. And the idea is the same, that rather than having different silos, have all the education leaders work together and the student leaders work together so that we can accelerate the progress. In terms of an organization and engagement, how does VCCA as a advocacy, education, community engagement organization help in the process? Well, we're definitely able to be the home of a statewide educational collaborative. We're able to host monthly meetings where we bring together all the schools and talk about progress and opportunities. Dr. Snow has also been leading Journal Club to make things definitely as part of the meeting and introducing academic elements to our work. We're able to promote opportunities for scholarship activities by funding certain activities where the students' leaders can get together and bring more folks together to teach them about what climate and health and education is all about. We provide guidance and professional development for student leaders, and we provide fundings for certain elective activities. So UVA School of Medicine has recently started a climate and health elective, co-directed by myself and our chair, Sam Adut. And we plan to use some of our VCCA funding to help fund events such as Advocacy Day to include the 25 students that are going to be in the class. And finally, certainly having a grant to promote student engagement is helpful. And this is the product of one of our grants. So about a year ago, the School of Pharmacy and School of Medicine and VCU came together and used a budget of about $300 to do a plant-based cookout with really community engagement, but also introduce a level of education to the participants. The lessons learned is that curriculum integrations can be difficult, but not insurmountable. And the top-down, bottoms-up approach together is the most effective, as it can capture the student engagement with student interest groups. We really try to help and identify stakeholders that are needed to get the process started and going. And yearly statewide collaborative can really share experience and inspirations amongst the different groups. Funding, of course, can always be helpful in strategic areas to propel the movement forward. And one of my last slides is to share a worksheet that we have developed. So this is a worksheet that we made to have all the different schools kind of check out during the summit to decide to kind of have a determination of where they are, where they want to be as a program in the next 12 months, and identify key stakeholders and resources so that we can plan accordingly. And with that, I'll share my email address at the end, but thank you very much for your attention and happy to take some questions at the end.
Thank you so much for that really great presentation. Just seeing what you guys are doing from both the top down and the bottom up is really pretty inspiring. And going at it from all different angles, not only just mentorship, not just curriculum support, but also funding as well. So I think we can learn a lot from the experience you guys have had. So thanks so much. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lisa Doggett.
Hi, thank you, Christy. I'm Lisa Doggett. I'm a family doctor in Austin, and I'm joined by my colleague, Becky Bernhardt. We are from Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility and are very excited to share the work that we've done here in Texas. Let's see if I can get this thing to advance. Okay, here we go. So just a little bit about PSR. We really focus on using our public health and medical expertise to work with partner organizations as well as other chapters of the National Physicians for Social Responsibility to protect human life from the gravest threats to health through outreach, education, and advocacy. Obviously, climate change and air pollution are very much grave threats to human health, and they really have been the main focus of our organization, which has been around since 2003. We also are really concerned about health equity and environmental justice concerns. We know that climate change and air pollution disproportionately affect the most vulnerable: children, the elderly, people of color. And we work to educate health professionals, the public, and lawmakers about the health impacts of climate change and air pollution. So here we are. Just a little bit more about myself. I grew up in Austin, went away for all my school, and then have been back in Austin for almost 20 years. I was concerned that there was not a chapter of PSR in Texas. In fact, I couldn't believe it when I called the national office and said, I don't see one online. So I remedied that soon after I returned to Texas again back in 2003. We have been very fortunate to have a great group of physicians as well as nurses and other environmental activists who have been involved with our board over the years, as well as our membership. Becky, do you want to just say a little more about yourself?
Sure. I'm Becky Bernhardt. I have a background as a practicing lawyer in Texas and did criminal justice reform and legal services before coming to PSR. And I'm really excited to be working on environmental justice and the health impacts of climate change.
Thanks. And we'll hear a little bit more from Becky in just a few minutes. So just a little bit about Texas, and this might help you feel better about wherever you live in the country if it's not Texas. If we were a nation, Texas would be the third largest natural gas producer and the fourth largest oil producer in the world. We have 13 coal-fired power plants in Texas, including a plant in suburban Houston that kills about 180 people a year. Our Texas Legislative Committee just issued a report that wind and solar are a threat to stability and should be forced to buy electricity produced by fossil fuels for stability backup. And at a press event recently, the governor could not actually say the words climate change and kept referring to extreme weather when talking about some of the climate concerns and weather issues we've had this summer, the bad drought. So we're coming from a place that's pretty tough. We are definitely challenged by our political climate, as well as facing some of the worst weather events here in Texas. We're very susceptible to droughts, to floods, to tropical storms and hurricanes. It's a tough place to be. However, we are fortunate. Our chapter of PSR is located in Austin. We're kind of the blue dot in the big red state. And back in 2016, I believe that's when the medical school started. Yeah, it took a few years to get up and running, but we were one of 2 large cities in the country that did not have a medical school until just about 6 years ago. The UT Dell Medical Center was formed, quickly has become a top medical school, very competitive. We have incredible students at the medical school here in Austin. I think one thing that was good for us is that the medical school really prides itself on innovation. So they have looked to others in the community to come up with good ideas to help them be really kind of cutting edge in their training for students. So we really saw the medical school as a potential partner, and we're noticing that there was just a real lack of knowledge among physicians, both in training as well as certainly practicing physicians about climate. A lot of doctors really don't see the link between climate and health. And to me, this is it's the biggest health emergency of our time. So really making sure that doctors know about the climate crisis was really, really important. And we felt like we needed to go right to the source of training and wanted to partner with the medical school. Again, they're seeing themselves as an innovative, force in the community. And we actually were fortunate enough to find a foundation who partnered with us to create a elective in climate and environmental health. The Cynthia George Mitchell Foundation is a local foundation. We reached out to them in 2019, and they were glad to fund us. It was quite exciting. So we started the class in the early part of 2020, which you may remember is right around the time of the pandemic. We had our first, I think it was like 3 or 4 classes in person. It continues to be taught every spring on Fridays over a 10-week period. And we do it at the lunch hour and actually provide free lunch for the students. But we actually had to switch very quickly after our first few classes to be virtual. And it worked out fine. We really haven't had any problems. We were able to go back to mostly in person in 2021. And then this year, I believe all of the classes were in person, although we do have a couple of presenters who Zoom in and provide virtual talks to the students. We've updated the curriculum on an annual basis, but this shows the most recent curriculum where we landed for 2022. This past spring. We have talks on air and water pollution, climate change, of course. We actually have an excellent talk that comes from Dr. Robert Haley, who is a physician in Dallas who speaks on climate change around the country and is super knowledgeable in this area. We have more specialized talks by an OBGYN and maternal and fetal health, as well as a psychiatrist who provides a talk on mental health. We have talks on healthy food systems, energy production, plastic pollution, how to be an informed and effective advocate. And Becky's going to talk a little bit more about that. And by popular demand, we actually added a course on how to take an environmental health history because the students really wanted to have that added. And that was a very well received course this past spring. And just to mention, I'm going to turn it over to Becky. Our course has a large climate component, but it is not exclusively about climate change. We really want it to be comprehensive and include other environmental health topics as well, as you can see from that list. So climate change really kind of gets infused into all of the talks. And then we, of course, have one talk that's really dedicated to the science behind climate change. So Becky, you can take over.
Sure. So there is one assignment in the elective, and it's not graded, but the students seem to really appreciate it, and it's focused on the advocacy component. The students get to choose whether they want to write a letter to the editor or an op-ed to one of the main papers of record in Texas, either in one of the large cities or the Texas Tribune, or if they want to write a lesson plan for a K through 12 class or group of students on the impacts of pollution or climate change on health, or if they want to develop some kind of educational materials for patients on how what a particular environmental impact on patient health and how patients can mitigate that impact. So students have done projects in all three of these areas over the years.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, my watch needs to talk to me. I'm not sure why. Anyway, and they've been able to put letters to the editor and op-eds in local papers. They've been able to successfully publish things. So it's been a really successful part of the course, and actually something that the students seem to enjoy a whole lot. Lisa, can you get me the next slide? So these are a couple examples of student projects. The first one on the left is a part of a lesson plan for 3rd through 8th graders about sort of how kids can actually make an impact and why it's important to try to make change in your everyday life. And it also kind of ends with an opportunity for kids and their parents to measure their own carbon footprint. So that's pretty fabulous. And the second one is an opinion piece on the impact of wildfires in Central Texas that just recently got published over the summer here in Austin. So it's from the most recent course, just to give you a little sense of what the students have done. So pretty much from the first course and every the 3 years that we've had the course at Dell Medical School, we've been doing evaluations, which we feel like is a really valuable component. The first year, we actually hired someone to do a more comprehensive evaluation and do a focus group with some of the students and write us a report about what the students really liked about the course and what they thought we could do better. And so that's a sort of screenshot of the front page of the evaluation report that we got in 2020. And every year, the course has changed a little bit in terms of what's been offered, and we pay attention to which lecturers get better grades and also what the students are interested in. And notably, the one course or the one lecture that we added this last spring that the students had specifically asked for got a perfect score from everybody. So apparently they really, really did want that information, and it was very important. And I think it's because, I mean, it was the one course that was really pragmatic and about being able to do an environmental health history and about sort of how to operationalize the information. It wasn't just, sort of climate change is happening and it really stinks. But, what can you do for your patients? So this is a sort of snapshot of our most recent evaluations. We had 9 lectures that were substantive, and 8 out of 9 of them basically got top marks, and 1 got sort of close to the top marks in terms of whether they were relevant to the students and in their future profession as doctors, whether or not they had a better understanding of environmental issues, impacts on public health, whether the speaker seemed knowledgeable and well-informed, and whether the material was presented clearly, and whether they thought they'd recommend it to friends. These are the same questions we ask every year so that we can kind of compare apples to apples as we move forward. And these are just a couple quotes that we have from students at the end of the session or the end of the semester. We sort of do a comprehensive evaluation and ask students to give us a little bit more narrative feedback so that we can we'll actually get some more specific information if they have any really concrete recommendations or concerns about things that we could do better, things that they really liked or really didn't like. So one of the students who took the course, and this was not actually connected to the course, went on to do a survey of faculty, medical students and residents at Dell Medical School, and what their opinions were about, well, both how much they knew or they felt they knew about climate change and its impact on people's health, and also how important they thought it was for physicians to know about the impacts of climate change on health. And so the key sort of finding for this educational effort is that 65% of the medical students surveyed believed that all US medical schools should incorporate into their mandatory curriculum the health impacts of climate change. 77% of the residents believed that of those surveyed, and 73% of the faculty surveyed. And I did look at the data in terms of what percentage of the students and faculty and residents were surveyed. And it was 15 of the faculty and 81 of the students, which for Dell is actually a really big number because there are only 200 medical students in the whole school. I know that's just one school, but anyway, it's also a school in Texas. What the other things that have come out of this course is that we've made friends. We've started reaching out to other medical schools in Texas, and professors at other medical schools in Texas have developed electives that are that are pretty similar to ours, and used some of our materials, and we work together on those electives. So there is now a climate change and health elective at UT Southwestern Medical School. There is also one at Baylor Medical School. And we have also, or at least doctors on our board have helped develop student affinity groups at different medical schools in Texas also by sponsoring them. Where are we going from here? Doctors who are professors at medical schools in Texas, at least a couple of them, are starting to incorporate climate and health into the core curriculum. We know, and I hope she's on this call, that Dr. Govind is working on that at UT Southwestern. Our board member, Dr. Papanastayou, is working on that at UT Health San Antonio. And is also working with us on doing that at UT Dell. And we just like to see it spread across the whole state. And we're hoping that there are folks who would be interested in talking about that during the discussion. So we'd just like to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much for that really amazing presentation. So it's so cool to hear what people are doing. I would have absolutely loved to take that course on how to take an environmental health history. I'd still actually like to take that course, so you could let me know and I'll zoom in for it. But I'd like to just open it up for anybody. Questions from the audience. Feel free to either put questions in the chat or to unmute yourselves and ask away.
I had a question. When you're talking about environmental health history, that's fairly broad. I mean, there's different types of environmental health. People who are into environmental health, they're talking about specific toxic exposures, where your house is, What is it you're getting into in this context?
Now you're going to ask someone who's not a medical professional to remember the lecture. What I remembered about the lecture had a lot to do with talking about excessive heat and which medicines are most which medicines make people's bodies sort of more sensitive to excessive heat, which is probably a particular Texas angle on doing a health history, because excessive heat is sort of our biggest of all the climate change impacts and we have all of them. Excessive heat is the biggest problem, or the most dangerous one. So a lot of the content was about, how to address excessive heat and how to address, folks who have sensitivities to excessive heat because of what medicine that they're on, or at least that was a big part of it. Or maybe that's just the part I remember. But I can also get you in touch with the professor who did the talk, who at least at the time was in Pennsylvania. But I think you're right. Over time, what that lecture may need to be is more of a structure that you can put something into depending on where you're practicing.
And I think what you're on is the right track. I mean, like I had mentioned to some colleagues, I'm a physician, and I was mentioning to colleagues about just on their review of systems form, if nothing else, you want to know what job the person's doing, what teenagers, for a pediatrician, teenagers and athletics, they tend to not hydrate and overestimate what they can do. So the heat one is really an important angle. I agree, and the medications. No, you hit on the main ones. In my discussions I had suggested, and then it, like a bell curve, it trails off to how far do you get into different things. But medications and heat preparedness, those seem to be the big ones.
I can briefly chime in. I attended previous sessions of these types of trainings. So even think about the zip code destiny of where do you live? How far is it from the freeway? Is there a lot of air pollutants? Are you right by a coal power plant that would be exacerbating your asthma? Thinking about flooding. So when was your house built? How has the cleanup process been in your area? And then think about mold exposures and other things. I think these have been notably absent when we have taken history before as clinicians.
I agree. The only hesitation I feel, or felt, I'm retired now, but felt and some might feel, is just their ability to intervene at that level, right? It depends, what are you going to do with the answer? You can tell them to move their house, or you're going to, some people have to be in the job there. And I'm in Southern California, commutes are a big deal, right? How much you're commuting is how much pollution and so on. So no, I agree. That's what I meant about sort of the tails of the curve. There's how fine-grained are most docs, and as a practical thing, could feel either competent to or have time to deal with. I'm not questioning what you're saying. You're exactly right. Those are all things that come up.
I would actually love to hear a little bit more if you guys have had student experiences and if they've then got on to incorporate that into their practice. Have you guys heard any feedback about what sort of things people are hearing from their patients and what they've kind of either felt themselves that they've been able to do or not do?
I haven't heard back, but that's actually a really good question. It'd be a good thing for us to circle back with participants from the elective and see how things are going. So maybe that's a new something we can add.
Yeah, it's been so new in what we've been doing. Much of our curriculum work has been done, at this level over the last couple of years. So many of those students have not quite graduated yet, but I think oftentimes it opens up their eyes to say that gentleman that came in after he passed out on an excessively hot day, that's connected to climate change, or that person that came in with an asthma exacerbation was connected to climate change, or that family that had to move from Florida because of the storms of flooding, that's connected as well. So it's about, opening everybody's eyes and making these connections.
I'll just add something that I think was an important component of our elective, and that is the evaluation that Becky mentioned. I think that is a piece that often gets missed in creating new programs. And I think that it's been incredibly helpful for us in getting renewed funding. I just really wanted to highlight that. I know there's not even a question about it, but I just, we had a really strong evaluation by an independent professional evaluator. She actually gave us a nice discount because she knew that we were a nonprofit, and the results were great. And we were able to go back to both the medical school and to the funder and say, hey, we have this evaluation. And then we've continued to do that. So I just kind of wanted to put a plug in for doing an evaluation with whatever you're creating, because it does really inform your process in the future, but it also helps. It's a nice tool to convince others to support you.
And actually, just to tack on to that, even before the course is approved and and it gets implemented, doing a needs assessment or is very helpful. That at the students level, at a bottoms up approach, student leaders can send out surveys to ask their colleagues about what they want to hear, or how many of them would want to have this as part of their education, and that sends a very powerful message to the deans and curriculum stakeholders.
Great point.
I think in terms of thinking about a way to make this a little bit more of a science and making it a little bit more predictable of a pattern, that progression of student leadership, getting a needs assessment, and then getting the planetary health report card filled out, talking to stakeholders in the school and identify key folks, and then getting that process implemented has been really helpful. And capturing the energy that we have by the students. As a matter of fact, the UVA Climate Change and Health elective, the original proposal and curriculum was actually written by a medical student between her first and second year of medical school as part of a project, and we're able to carry that forth and made it a reality.
Homan, could you maybe talk a little bit more about the work that you all do to encourage advocacy in students?
Absolutely. So, as our state organization, our Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, we have an annual advocacy day. So ever since we started, we do go down to our state capital, Richmond, to talk to our lawmakers about climate change and health. So as part of the elective, as the timing was actually quite right when we started this past year, we actually included the students in that process. This past year, because of COVID, we actually still had to do it virtually. This coming year, we are looking to make it in person. And that does mean, busing about 25 students from Charlottesville, Virginia, all the way down to Richmond, which probably is about 3 to 4 hours away, depending on traffic, to make this reality, and then even think about accommodations. But having a large amount of having a large participant, a list of participants would really bolster the effect that we would have when we talk to lawmakers, and we feel like as an organization, that's a worthwhile investment to put in. So, building it into the elective has been helpful. And then we also did a similar capstone project where the students were able to either write a letter to the editor, or write a letter to the university president, or make pamphlets or certain organization presentations, and that was helpful in kind of giving them a way to apply the knowledge that they had in the form of advocacy or education.
Have you run in, or is anybody else in this call run into any barriers to institutions not wanting advocacy to be part of the discussion? We fortunately have not at Dell Medical School, but we've heard about that a little bit in other schools in Texas.
We have not at the University of Virginia. I think the main barrier has always been cost, that how, there's no budget in the course, so but we were able to overcome that through our means.
That's good. Yeah. I think that advocacy is really important. I don't think that it's taught either. And I think, it doesn't need to necessarily be just limited to environmental health. I think as physicians, we don't have a lot of role models that are really active in terms of pushing for change from a policy standpoint. And so I think that that's a really important part of what we're doing with our class is, Dr. Levinson, you were saying, what do you do with the information from an environmental health history? What do you do with the information from the course? A lot of it's really depressing and can be overwhelming. And so we really think that having that advocacy component, we have a class where we have a physician talk about her own advocacy. She teaches on how to write a letter to the editor. We provide sample letters and materials to help the students understand what that process is like. And then we also now are able to refer back to the prior classes where we've had students that have been successful getting things published. And I think that's really a kind of a powerful way to set them up to do that kind of work in the future.
Yeah, we did note a similar theme in our course where the first week and a half has been pretty dark and depressing as they went through all the materials. So we intentionally put the advocacy day in the last week along with the capstone project to really give them a sense of empowerment in that regard. I do see a question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think you're totally right there. This whole thing is so demoralizing. It is so easy, there's maybe the first thrill of learning something about it, but that goes away really fast. And I think it's very important to make people feel like, not make people feel, that's silly, you know what I'm saying, to have something positive, like, no, you can be part of the solution, we need you, is part of it. And yes, I'm writing letters to the editor. I'm like Citizens Climate Lobby is, very much into that and so on. I think that's great.
There's actually an organization called Eco America. And there's actually a climate and health ambassador program where they actually do training to help you, give you the tools to talk about the subjects. And they've actually been very open in the past in terms of doing a special training for the for trainees. So I think any of you guys that are interested, I would plug it for them as well as a good resource. I do see a question in the chat about methods of teaching, so I can go ahead and address that first. And the way that we set up our elective has synchronous and asynchronous components. So 2 weeks is a long time, and I think it's a big lift to really have a involved, interactive program. So the way that our course is set up is typically half of the day is allotted with asynchronous review of materials that are pre-selected ahead of time. So a combination of scholarly articles with book chapters, with videos, and newspaper or online articles about a subject, and then typically we would finish the day with an interactive discussion about the case. And that model has worked pretty well, where the students feel like they're different. You change it up with different paces and don't have to be on the computer and Zoom all the time. So
in terms of our teaching methods, really we have every lecture is taught by someone different. So there's definitely a lot of variety in terms of how different lecturers approach the class. We really encourage everyone to be interactive. We do generally have PowerPoint presentation. But for my lecture, I talk about air and water pollution. I incorporate questions to ask the students kind of assess their knowledge and also generate some discussion throughout the talk. I think some lectures may not be as interactive as others, but overall, we've had really, really great evaluations from the students. So what we're doing is working.
Just another question about materials. Interested in what your guys' experience has been. Have you created most of your own materials, gotten materials from other places? How would you suggest people who are kind of trying to start this to either go forward or find things and that sort of thing?
Well, each one of our lecturers has generally created their own materials. And I will say that all of our lecturers are volunteers. We're not paying anybody to do this. They've all stepped up and done this on their own. We've had incredibly generous people that have spent a lot of time researching their topic and doing the talks. And I think that a lot of them are willing to share. Dr. Robert Haley, who's done our climate lecture, has done the same climate lecture as well for 2 other medical schools now in Texas. I've done air and water pollution for Baylor Medical School. I have a talk that I do on advocacy, specifically health professional advocacy, that I've done for UT Southwestern as well as for University of Oklahoma. And I'm glad to do it for any of you guys. I think it's really fun. It kind of tells my personal story. It's interactive and lots of pictures. It's kind of a fun thing to go through. So I'm glad to do that for you guys. If you want to hear more about that or any of the other talks, reach out to me. If you saw any of the topics that were on our curriculum that we showed that were of interest, we certainly might be able to provide those virtually as well. So yeah, keep in touch. You can reach out to me or Becky by email.
And I would echo that here as well. I'm happy to help in any regard. There's a question about textbooks, and the textbook that we used is called Environmetics. It's a small, fairly well condensed book about climate change and health, and it's small enough so that each chapter is easily digestible, can be read under an hour, and the medical students really responded well to it. One of the resources that you can think of is talking to your local health science library. So each medical school would have libraries that may have different subscriptions to journals and textbooks. And once in a while, you may get lucky that you already have a subscription to it, or they can purchase it with a discount and have license for all the students involved. And that's what we're able to do for our class to eliminate that particular cost of it.
Thank you. And I also appreciate the other comment Harry McDermott left in the comments, just kind of infusion of some of this material into the existing curriculum. And we have been doing that. We're looking at doing that more, particularly at the University of UT San Antonio. And I think that is a good strategy to include this material.
I think when I think about the CRHE effort by GCCHE, this is, in many ways a really global resource, so that it can be shared all around the world. In the end, I think it's still also important to have a complement of a local collection of speakers and materials. Some of the issues may be more locally driven, so getting a group of schools together that are in the immediate surroundings of each other can help with really addressing local concerns and have advocacy and other talks that really hit home. But in the end, I think some of the talks can definitely be generalized, and the CRHE would be a great resource for all.
I'm actually just going to put that link in the chat if anybody wants to see it from that new website that was just released. So there's a lot of good stuff there. So thanks so much for bringing that up. There's also a question from Mehul Tejani. Would you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure, I hope you can hear me. My question, and it was, I think Harry McDermott was also replying to me as well, but sort of the two styles I've seen are more integrated, which I think I would say is also somewhat of the infusion model over time. of embedding some of this content into existing lectures versus having sort of either one-off lectures or electives where you focus on this topic alone. And I was just curious about your experiences with those and sort of if you felt one was more effective than the other, but understanding that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
I can start with that. So I think it all depends on the schools and programs and how things are designed. So, the many schools and programs, I think having a standalone lecture is definitely an easy entry point. And between curriculum integration, that seems really big and insurmountable as opposed to one elective that can be well compacted for review by the curriculum committee. I think the elective always seems to be a little bit more digestible when it comes to getting it approved. I think the success has always been where we can do as much lift as possible from an organization standpoint and also from the student standpoint, that if they get to a point where they're practically writing the objectives and creating the slides and presenting it to an individual lecturer to say, hey, do you mind including this in your the next time you talk? That's been the way to really propel this forward.
I think for us, it's been easier since we are an external organization. We do have some connection with the medical school, but not a lot. And we don't really have a lot of influence over the curriculum. So it's been easier for us to really kind of have a standalone course. And it's also easier to get it included as an elective, obviously, because then students can choose to take it. But it is something that we're working on and wanting to do more to get it infused into the curriculum. And I think that ultimately probably it would be good to have both, something where people can go into more depth than they can with the class, where it's more standalone and intentional talking about environmental health. But I think infusing it into the curriculum so that it's really kind of thought about throughout the training period is really going to be helpful and important.
I think the other thing to consider is, as to Homa's point, is that depends on your environment. And, there was the slide about the top down versus the bottom up approach. And I would agree. I think the bottom up approach is probably the best way to go if you can and you have the time and the students are interested to organize. But with the infusion, one thing to consider is you can also come from the middle, in terms of the fact that you don't have to come from the top or the bottom. You can go directly to the faculty and say, here's this resource. It's already here for you. It's public access. Use it as you can, where you will. And that way you can kind of skip some steps and maybe be a little quicker and more efficient at getting some of this information out to students, rather than sometimes having to deal with the bureaucracies from either end. So.
Great point. Thank you. I like that.
We are right at the top of the hour. I just want to thank everybody for their engagement, for coming to this panel, to our panelists, for really sharing your experiences, your knowledge and everything. We really, really appreciated it. And I think there's going to be a lot of connecting after this. So I look forward to see where this goes with everybody else. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Thank you all.